All right. Well, thank you all again for the opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you all to our panelists. Our topic, our theme for the next 30 minutes is leading as citizens. And like the other panels, I'm gonna ask folks kind of why they decided to serve in uniform. But before we get to the why, DeJuan mentioned this earlier about the power of stories, and so I'm gonna start with you, Eric, and I just wonder if you could, what was the moment when you decided, or you realized you were gonna serve in the military? Where were you? Who were you with? What was it like? And if there wasn't one single moment, or you can't remember because that's totally fair, what was the moment when what it meant to be in uniform hit home? Oftentimes it's the first encounter with the drill sergeant, but maybe it's not. So like, what's that moment? Take us to that time, and then we'll, Ms. Adams and Admiral Abbott will ask you the same question.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for a great conference. So some of these things have been said, these themes have been hit on before. For me, I did need a way to pay for college. I grew up in Milwaukee, the son of two teachers, and my mom stayed at home. She was a German immigrant, and the practical reality was had to figure out a way to pay for college. I didn't come from a military family, so the two options from my perspective were ROTC or one of the academies, which I didn't know much about. And for some reason, I thought I wanted to do a Marine Corps ROTC scholarship. I didn't know much. I just knew they were the hardest to get into, so I thought I'd try that. And I remember showing up to the interview at the recruiting station in Milwaukee wearing my older brother's oversized white Don Johnson Miami Vice jacket with long hair. And during the interview, I'm pretty sure I called it the Marine Corps. So needless to say, that was a dead end. And it didn't pan out, and despite my parents not even knowing I had also applied for the Naval Academy, that door opened and decided to walk through it. And I really didn't know what I was getting into until that very first day. I just learned at West Point they call it R Day, we called it I Day. But where there's this moment after the ceremony, the swearing in, where you go from being a civilian to being in the military, and it becomes a reality very quickly when everyone's yelling at you and telling you to brace up and all those good things. So that's when it became real.
There'll be a follow-up question about whether you still have the jacket, but Ms. Adams, what was that moment like for you?
So I was actually in college when I joined ROTC, and they gave me the option to go to officer or the camp for 35 days, or to go to basic training. And I said, no, well, I want to know how like the enlisted live, so I think that's important for me to understand that. I think at the time too, and I see this amongst other veterans who've joined, I was running from something as well. I had a traumatic incident that happened around that same time, and so when that option came to go away for 9 weeks, not knowing what I was getting into, I said, sure, let's do that. So I went to the Army, and unfortunately, I never made it back to that university with the ROTC, so I ended up staying enlisted, getting married, and 6 kids later, I had a whole different journey. Yes, 2 sets of twins. Just put that out there. That's how you double that quickly.
So the fashion and function question about clothing, very salient in your house.
It didn't matter. I got a husband.
Admiral Abbott, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'd like to just take a second to say also thanks for We the Vets setting up this wonderful conference and all the partner organizations that are involved and how important I think it is. And we're doing it at this magnificent location, the location, if I understand correctly, of one of the presidents of 8 who was a senior military officer. And I'm going to get around to answering the exact moment when I realized that this was my duty, but since I actually don't have an answer for that, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit and say that I know the message has been that we all ought to be serving, and almost everyone here has served in uniform, but I'm very much convinced that we as veterans need to continue to serve in the country needs us now, and there are so very many ways that that's possible, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about a few of those. I'm like Joe and the Sergeant Major in the previous panel. I grew up in a military family. I had a grandfather and a father and a cousin and brother and 2 sons who've all gone to the same school that you did. And I think I could salute as soon as I could stand up. So that was the moment.
Great, fantastic. And just the next question for each of you would be, what's something that being in the military taught you about your own capacity as a leader? I think, again, the origin stories here underscore coming into the military, we have probably had different conceptions of your own identity as a leader. What was one thing that the military, or being in the military, you learned about yourself as a leader? And would love to start with you, Admiral.
Again, I don't have a precise answer to these very good questions, but I think, like all of us, we get influenced by the individuals for whom we work. And I could tell you what we call sea stories about lots of them, but let me just pick Colin Powell. I worked for General Powell when he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I was a 1-star, the current operations officer. And as you might expect, General Powell was making lots of trips across the river to participate in policy discussions at the White House in the sit room, and my team would, and the Sergeant Major will enjoy this, we would prepare slide decks for General Powell to take across to the sit room. I can remember walking in with a slide deck of maybe 30 slides for General Powell, and he very politely took them and paged through and selected 2 to take across. But it's important to understand that it's a continuum of learning that you have as you provide public service. Hopefully you're growing in a way that will be beneficial to the country later on. I certainly felt a privilege being able to watch General Powell, and he is also an example for us, in my view, of someone who very clearly understood that duty didn't end when he took his uniform off. He continued to serve this country in all of the ways that you know, literally until the end. I'm a great admirer of Colin Powell.
Ms. Adams.
I think something I learned was that I had this can-do attitude and don't quit that, you know, my younger self didn't see. You know, coming through school and, you know, elementary, high school, you know, I thought I was quiet. I thought that maybe I wasn't as much of a leader. But, you know, going into a military where, you know, it was still a time where I was told, oh, women shouldn't be here, and you shouldn't be serving, and what are you going to contribute? And then when I told my mom that I was going into the military, she was like, you can't do that. Like, you're not going to be able to do that. And so I'm that type of person, which I've learned, is that, oh, you told me I can't do it? Watch this. So I really did learn that I don't quit, and I will continue to push, and I will show you better than I can tell you. That's something I tell my kids all the time. I'll show you better than I can tell you. And so I developed this strength within me to be able to put up with so many different things. I mean, I remember even, and it just blew my mind that I met people who had never, like, been in the presence of an African-American person in person. Like, they only saw people on TV. Like, that was mind-blowing to me. So I got this opportunity to educate and just lead by example, not necessarily putting a title on it. So
I appreciate that. And Eric, over to you.
Yeah, so one of the things I've come to appreciate about veterans is just how diverse veterans are, how different our stories are, different backgrounds, but we come together for a common purpose. Going back to the plebe summer, something that I was proud of, they did personality testing my year, the Myers-Briggs. Anyone taking Myers-Briggs in here, right? I'm an ENFP. Supposedly 10% or less of veterans are ENFPs, but they gave it to us at the beginning of the summer, and most of my classmates thought, well, I need to answer this like I'm a trained killer, because that's what they want. I just answered it the way, and I was exactly the same at the beginning as the end, and that was very uncommon. So being true to yourself, even when you're in a new situation or a new organization, new environment, being really true to yourself and who you are, and bringing that to bear, and trying to carry that forth throughout my time in the military.
Well, and it feels like there's a consistent theme where it's leading by example, both in the case of Colin Powell, but also learning that that's a strength that you have, is to show by the actions that you have and by being authentic to who you are, even in situations that are adverse or might incentivize you to be otherwise. I want to move now to contemplate, because each of you made a decision at some point that you were going to be a civic or a public leader, which isn't an obvious or necessarily common choice for every veteran. And as we've heard, oftentimes the transition is actually quite discombobulating, that you actually lose that sense of leadership that was maybe discovered in service. And so again, take us to that moment when you either decided or realized that you were a civic leader, even though you are no longer in uniform. And if it's okay, I'd love to start with you, Ms. Ad.
Sure. When did I realize that? Maybe today. I think that, you know, the many steps that I've taken in my life are not because I wanted to lead. It was just because I wanted to make a difference. And, you know, I fell off a deuce-and-a-half truck with the rails up when I was preparing to go to Iraq, and ended up in a wheelchair and told I may never walk again. And so I had to fight for my VA benefits. And so that sparked me to want to do more for others. And so I went back to school, got off my butt, stopped watching Lifetime, and started, went to law school and got my law degree and started helping veterans in that space. And then I saw there was a need with women veterans, so I started a nonprofit. None of these things I was seeking to say, hey, I want to lead in this space. It was just that there was a gap. There was nothing there, and so I took it upon myself. And so that's how I ended up, you know, getting in the position of working for the governor in Michigan, and then even being recognized to be chosen and selected for this position. I think, as you mentioned about being your authentic self, I think that we all have those leadership capabilities. We all see a need, we see an issue, we see a challenge, and you know, as a psychology major, I don't know if you ever heard of that Kitty Genovese story where, you know, she's in this alley and she's being attacked and everybody's watching from the windows. And everybody made this assumption that somebody's going to call 911. Nobody called 911 because we all made this assumption. And because of that case that I learned in psychology many years ago, I'm always that person that says, I can't assume that it's happening. I have to make it happen. And so that's, I think, where that leadership comes in, and whether that makes me a civic leader, it just makes me someone who is willing to take action, even if it's hard. So,
which again, I think we'll be connecting on this, but I think that's something that we're going to hear and we have heard about, just stepping up in the presence when people are either anxious or fearful, simply stepping forward and demonstrating that there's an alternative to just stepping back and retrenching is an act of leadership, and it's something that veterans, I think, find that a part of them kind of consistently. But would love to now turn, Admiral, over to you, that moment when you realized, I am either going to or I am a civic leader out of uniform.
Well, I'd like to say that early on, after taking off the uniform, I realized that I was not a candidate to be one of the retired military officers who became President of the United States. I know we've had 4 of them. One of them, of course, home is here. But I was clearly interested in finding things that I could do. And for instance, I've become a poll worker at Arlington County at the Oak Ridge Elementary School.
There we go.
I'll see you there if that's where you vote on Tuesday. But there's also a chance that is involved in life, and so you know you can plan to do things, and then sometimes things happen, and that was very much the case for me. I had been asked to come over and do a study for Vice President Cheney in the summer of 2001 on WMD terrorism, and I happened to be at the White House on 9/11. And so I was asked to stay on and help Governor Tom Ridge get established as the Homeland Security Advisor, and I became his deputy and helped him and others design the Department of Homeland Security and write the first Homeland Security strategy. And there I was. But I became very much aware of how important it is and was for people with military experience to be able to provide that after they retire. And I have other sea stories that I can add if we have time.
Fantastic. Appreciate that. And Eric, over to you to close it out.
I wish I had spoken before the Admiral. This feels pretty small, but I got out of the Navy in 2005 and moved to St. Louis, where we still live. It's a wonderful city. It's a great place to raise a family. When we first moved there, the neighborhood we lived in was transitioning, and our block was really rough. We lived across the street from a drug house. I'll never forget the night the Cardinals won the World Series in 2006. There was someone on the front porch across the street with a gun trying to break in, and so I got really involved with our local civic league. Got really involved with I had our alder person on speed dial, and just got really active with the community to try to do something about the problem in our neighborhood, and got involved that way. Also went to law school. Went to law school with the idea that I would maybe serve as a prosecutor. By the time I ended law school, I wanted to work for the public defender. Had a young family at the time. Starting salary for the Missouri Public Defender's Office, $30,000. So that was a non-starter. And then did a number of other things before circling back around to civic leadership later.
What I love about that is that, and again, there's some themes that we've heard consistently, which one, the importance of local community as often the setting within which we can start and initiate civic leadership, where it's around a clear need or a clear problem to solve, or around a specific community that you see needing to help navigate a complex system or have their voice be heard at a table, or even a problem that is maybe less community-oriented, but when the country was obviously reeling from 9/11, how do you figure out what system actually can serve and support and make people less afraid at a time when everyone was so scared? I'd love to kind of dig into that by asking, what is it about being a veteran that you think can help other veterans, or even folks who aren't from the military veteran family community, find their own sense of leadership, right? That it's not just about what we do as leaders, but actually that we are activating leaders across all of our organizations and individual work. And Eric, I'd love to start with you, because I think that one of the things that I always admired about the organization you've stood up is that you're consistently kind of helping people discover their own identity as a civic leader.
Yeah, that's a big role. So we started Veterans for All Voters, and I want to give a shout out. We have a couple of our board members here, Jeremy Butler, Tawan Wilker, others that are just fantastic. And it was a team effort standing up Veterans for All Voters with the idea of giving veterans an on-ramp to get involved in politics in a nonpartisan way. Just focus on structural reforms, focus on the structural problems that are underneath all the other problems that aren't being solved, and just give them a way to serve. For the 49%, it's actually, some polls is higher, for nonpartisan or independent military veterans. I'm one of them. Every time I looked at engaging in politics, the first thing people would say is, you have to pick a team. Eric, just pick a team. I've never once said I'm a Republican or a Democrat. So just giving people a way to serve where they don't have to pick an extra team or an extra identity that actually isn't helpful.
And Ms. Adams, for you, because in your current role too, you're leading civil servants, you're leading across government, you're also helping to, I think, other veterans across the country discover their own sense of leadership. So what is it about kind of your experience in the service as a civic leader that's helped you do that?
Well, I think one of the things that we can do to help veterans kind of see themselves in these spaces is to remove that big burden of the word leadership. I think that when we talk about leadership, there are so many people, we were talking about the Myers-Briggs, that may feel introverted and don't feel like they can see themselves as leaders. And when we say leaders, we think of the President of the United States. We think of all of these big individuals, but we don't really see ourselves as leaders. And so I think removing that title and just saying, you know, you can continue your service after service. Find your purpose. I was just speaking earlier about how, you know, connecting veterans to their purpose is suicide prevention. We see it when veterans retire. We see it when veterans are looking for something else. And if we can encourage them to, even if it's small, join your Rotary Club or, you know, join your local civic group, any of these little things that allow them to give back, then they will become the leaders that they've been meant to be without putting the label on it. And I think that that's going to be the biggest important thing that we do. Because again, and when I tell you, do I see myself as a civic leader, you know, I've always struggled with the term leader because I'm just doing me. And so I think if we can get veterans to just do them, to continue to serve and to continue to find that purpose, we will see more civic engagement.
I want to come to you for a second. I would love to just do a quick follow-up. What is it you think that sometimes, like you mentioned, the actual framing of leadership or leading itself can be a barrier, not seeing themselves as a leader? What else do you think kind of sometimes can be an impediment to veterans, you know, as they transition out to accessing this energy that everybody has within them, but yet doesn't always manifest?
Well, I would say from personal experience, feeling like you fit in the space that you're trying to navigate. And so, you know, I'm speaking with governor's offices and local leaders and even, you know, VSOs on a regular basis, you know, in the work that I do. And I'm always encouraging them to reach out to their local government, to actually introduce themselves to who they are and let them know who they are in the community, because we make these assumptions that our local leaders understand the veteran space. And so the question that has come back, which now we're working on talking points for it, is, well, how do I do that? How do I start that conversation? So I think the biggest barrier is that people understanding how to start the conversation. They want to, they know what they want to say, but they just don't know how to open that door.
Small acts of agency are so critical and all of that. So, and Admiral, I'll read you the same question. What is it, how do you think, or how have you found it successful in activating this energy among other veterans, non-veterans, folks in the military family community?
So I agree with Janetta, who said, you know, you do at the level that you are what you can. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt who said, do what you can with what you've got where you are. And that applies to all of us. And, you know, I am seized with the notion that our country needs us now, we veterans, that I saw a statistic that veterans and veteran families may constitute as much as 15% of the electorate. And of course, you know, I would like to say, I hope we will all understand that we have to exercise the right to vote. That's fundamental. But other opportunities will come along, and it will depend on where you are. I remember in the summer of 2020, I got seized with the need to perhaps try to encourage more veteran involvement to make sure that veterans could vote. We had some specific concerns about active duty members actually being able to get their vote recorded. We put together a small nonpartisan initiative called Count Every Hero, and it was a group of 9 of us who had been either in the military or service secretaries, and we initiated steps to make certain that those votes got counted. And we put down a marker that we wanted to try to provide paths for individuals to find other means of dealing with the nation's democratic issues. And I'll give you an example. Count Every Hero at the moment is very much focused on the fact that we have a law called the Insurrection Act that it's been around, I think, since the Civil War, essentially, but it's one that we are concerned about in connection with its potential use in an election environment. And so we are working to see that perhaps changes might need to be made to the Insurrection Act. That's an example of the kind of thing that, you know, has come along and is an opportunity, and I hope there will be others that continue to come along for me.
And that story reminds me, and actually in both of your stories as well, that, you know, as we just heard in the panel before, veterans organizations, multi-family organizations have for a long time served as essential pillars of civil society in America writ large. So it's not necessarily new, but there is something distinct. You know, with At the Vote, we get to travel around the country, and I'm always struck by the number of veterans I meet who just on their own have started these small pockets of like pulling people together, figuring out what can we do in our local community, and I feel like that energy continues to build. The last question we want to close on, I mean, again, underscoring this idea of really trying to anchor ourselves in Flag Day and the narrative around Flag Day, would love to just close by asking you to share an experience you have, a moment, or multiple, where the flag played an unusually meaningful role. I think we all have had many of those in uniform, in and around uniform, but what was a moment, a time, a day, when that memory, the flag is strongly associated for you? Again, where were you? Who were you with? What was the moment like? Eric, we'll start with you and go down.
Yeah, so for me, it's a personal story of one of my best friends from my squadron lost his battle to cancer far too young. He died in 2018. He's interned at Arlington Cemetery, and I attended the service with his family in the summer of 2019. And I'm sure there's other people in the room who've been at those services, but the moment when the person hands the flag to the family and says, "On behalf of a grateful nation," it's such a sacred moment, and it's such a sacred and good use of the flag, and so meaningful. You know, that's definitely one.
I appreciate that, Ms. Adams.
I'll share two instances, and I'll try to keep it together. I think the first one was, so when I was injured, I was attached to a unit that ended up going over to Iraq, and I was in a section of, there were 10 of us, and the 9 that went over all died in a roadside bomb. And I remember, it was one of those things I pushed out till I saw a movie and it just triggered it. But I remember the roll call when they called all the names. And we played taps. And that was the moment for me where it really hit home what we sacrifice. And the second time was when we had to bury my father, who was a Bronze Star Vietnam veteran, in January of 2021, and at the National Cemetery. And so, I think it's brought meaning to the oath that we took. And I'll say this, there are so many veterans out there like me who, I'm a medically retired E3. By all accounts, I shouldn't be where I'm at. I think that's what we think. But I served where I was told to serve. I went where I was supposed to go. So those folks who don't believe they're a real veteran or don't feel they have something to contribute because of their veteran status, you're wrong. We all have something to contribute, and we all signed up to serve, and and that flag represents it. So,
thank you for that. And Admiral, over to you.
I think I have to recall Mrs. Westerman's 8th grade class at Annapolis Junior High School. And I know we all recited the Pledge of Allegiance. I remember I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Westerman made me certain that I could do that anytime she asked. And I feel deeply about the American flag, but I hope this is not going to end up sounding like a contrary view. The flag is a symbol for us. It's a symbol, and we have some others. The bald eagle is a symbol. The Statue of Liberty is a symbol. They're not as important as the flag for me. But what the flag represents is the republic for which it stands. And I care about what we veterans are doing to preserve that republic, which is built on freedom of speech and the rule of law and opportunity, and on liberty and justice for all.
I appreciate that, and thank you all so much for this. And just to underscore, I think one of the reasons that We the Vets looked at Flag Day as such an important opportunity to have this convening this conversation is that the veteran military family community is uniquely positioned to help make the connection of the flag that is national symbol and also, as we just heard, deeply personal, right? Because the country is not just a set of ideals or principles or documents, it's people, imperfect people, and that we are so much more powerful when we come together and access our shared American identity, and that when we release each other of imposing all these constraints that we put on each other too often. So thank you for that. Appreciate the conversation.